There is no foreign power that is flipping votes. There's no domestic actor flipping votes. I did it right. We did it right. This was a secure election.
Welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm David Ignatius, a columnist for the Washington Post. And today it's my pleasure to welcome Christopher Krebs, the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS. And it's fair to say one of the heroes in protecting the security of our 2020 election. Chris, welcome.
Thanks to Washington Post.
So, Chris, let's begin with your story. You began preparing for a secure election back in February. And I remember talking with you in August for a column at a time when President Trump was warning about the danger of fraud because of mail-in voting. And you told me in an on-the-record interview back then that this election would be slower to tabulate because of all the absentee votes, but that it would be safe and secure. And I want to ask you, did you get any pushback from the White House back then, unhappiness that you were contradicting the president in effect?
Well, David, let me actually frame this in terms of time and history. We had been preparing for a secure 2020 election, frankly, since the day I walked in the door of 2017 at the Department of Homeland Security. Now, I didn't fully appreciate the level of work this was going to take and the amount of coordination back then, nor did I anticipate that it would take up as much time, frankly, that it ultimately did. But this has been an effort three and a half years in the making, not just at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, but it was a whole of nation effort. And that is a term that gets bandied about sometimes and looked down upon. But this was truly state and local governments out in front with the full national security apparatus behind them, supporting them, the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, and the law enforcement. And so as we rolled into 2020, we didn't, in January, February, I don't think fully appreciated the complexities and challenges that we would face, principally from COVID. And so there was a dramatic shift starting in the primaries back in the spring across the country. And many of those shifts involved a greater uptick in voting by mail. And what we did was take a hard look at what are the additional security risks, the cyber and physical security risks associated with voting by mail. And we found that there was not a significant increase of risk. There was perhaps a transfer of risk because you had different parties involved, but there was no significant increase. Now, the narrative, though, at the time was that it was that voting by mail could lead to additional fraud. And that is an issue that's left to the law enforcement community, federal, state, and local. And that was what we were hearing at the time, is there was concern over fraud. And when you put security and fraud up against each other, they're two different things. And so there was a little bit of a perhaps dissonance in the messaging, but we stood by our security assessment. We didn't make any changes, and we kept all of our information available to our state and local partners.
Dissonance is putting it mildly. There was pretty strong argument from the White House that fraud was a huge risk in this election. One of the innovations, Chris, that you had at CISA was regular postings that you called rumor control, where there'd be rumors about the dangers of fraud, the risks of mail-in voting, and you'd put up the reality, as you'd say. You'd put the reality on top of the rumor. I've heard and written in the Post that there was some effort by the White House to see if some of that content could be taken down. Tell us a little bit about that and how you managed to keep that rumor control program intact.
So the concept behind rumor control was an additive feature because we had been focusing, again, over that 3.5 years through a range of scenarios to harden and improve the cybersecurity of these systems. But there's a second aspect. So we're not just doing the actual security improvement. We are also defending rather against what's known as a perception hack, where an adversary of whatever origin could say that a system was compromised or an insignificant event has a greater impact or implication than it actually does. And again, the concept behind rumor control was to get the facts out there on how systems work and how, for instance, election night reporting are not official results. So if you see changes in the amount of numbers posted, whether it was alleged massive dumps or whatever, it is not the actual votes themselves that are being adjusted. It's unofficial information, and that the ballots, and particularly the paper ballots, continue on. And so we were on a regular basis seeing disinformation and claims of improprieties or other things associated with the voting process on the security side, not on the fraud side. We dipped our toe in the water on the fraud side, more just to explain the security controls in place if dead voters, these claims of dead voters, we said, described what states and locals use on signature verifications. They look at death records, they look at all those sorts of things, and social security numbers. But again, it was more about getting information out there on the security controls at all steps of the voting process, before, during, and after. And so, in part, to inoculate the American voter against the claims that were emerging and claims that we frankly anticipated coming out.
Is it fair, Chris, to say that the president's repeated tweets, there must have been dozens of them, warning about fraud and mail-in voting, amounted to a kind of perception hack, in your words?
I certainly think that it's without a lot of evidence. Some of the claims that we're hearing out there, whether it's just from the fever swamp or from some of the advocates for the campaign, they were not in line with our understanding and our state and local partners' understanding of how these systems work and how the election machines, the equipment, the counting process, the canvass process, the audits, the recounts, the certifications. Again, we had confidence because there is no single point of failure related to technology, whether it's software or hardware. It's a concept known as software independence. But there are all these resilience measures in place. And really the best one that's out there is paper ballots. I've talked about that all week. And so, again, we just kept putting the facts out there. And what I said, my team, is if you get any pushback from anywhere else, I'm the Senate confirmed head of the agency. I approve the content that goes up. And if there's anyone that has any concerns with what's up there, they need to come talk to me.
And then, Chris, we came to a decisive moment about 10 days after the election. On November 14, the president was retweeting claims that a company called Dominion Voting Systems had been involved in massive fraud. And your agency, obviously at your direction, issued a statement that was important. I'm just briefly gonna note it. That there is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or in any way compromised the outcome. That statement got you fired 3 days later, and I assume when you made that statement, you knew that was a possibility.
So that statement was about I got fired 5 days and about 3 hours after that statement came out. It was released on the 12th of November, and it was not me. It was not CISA as an agency releasing that statement. It was the election security community. It was the members of our sector coordinating councils and our government coordinating councils, which is just kind of CISA speak for the groups that we pull together, that we convene to ensure that these things are secure. And so it was the perspective of all involved at the state, local level, the private sector, across the federal government, of what they had seen. And not just in that intervening 9 days since November 3rd. That was our understanding of the facts on the ground going back years. We had been watching, we had been monitoring. We'd had the intelligence community out there looking for bad guys, trying to do bad things and stopping them. when they could. And so that was a true sense of the community that we issued. And it was important, I think, as those closest involved to the administration of the election and securing the election, to put that statement and some facts out there again to the American people. Now, I've said it before, whether I thought I was going to get fired because of that statement, I don't know if it crossed my mind. I don't. It was the right thing to do. We needed to get information out there from the expert.
Let's talk about some other heroes who stood up to pressure and did the right thing in protecting our election security. I'd be interested in knowing who's on your list, Chris. Certainly, Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, comes to mind for me. But you've been dealing with officials around the country. Maybe you could just give us a couple of snapshots of people you think really served the country well in this period.
It is. It's a hard list to tick off right now, in part because there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Americans that support the administration of elections. Yes, there are some leaders in the space, typically secretaries of state, and I've talked about all the folks, that are in the swing states and are under the microscope right now. Secretary Bachbar in Pennsylvania, Secretary Benson in Michigan, Secretary Hobbs out in Arizona, Secretary Sagaski in Nevada. And I've made the point, all strong women that are standing up, that are putting country over party and are ensuring that this democratic process goes forward. I saw last night Gabe Sterling down in Georgia, who was responsible for the election, the administration part, got up and, he'd had a contract staffer that was receiving death threats. I've received death threats. A number of these officials have received death threats. And to me, it's just, there really aren't good words to describe just how un-American and undemocratic it is that the actual individuals that are responsible for the process of this most sacred democratic institution of elections are the ones that are getting the blowback here. And it's chilling to me in two ways. First is that we're actively undermining democracy. We're actively undermining confidence in the electoral process. Second chilling effect is that how the heck are we going to recruit election workers and election administration officials going forward if they think they're going to get death threats online and in person? This has got to stop. It has to stop. We have to let the professionals do their jobs. And it's well beyond time for everyone on both sides of the political spectrum to call for an end and to call for this our process, our certification process, and moving on into the next administration.
That's a powerful statement. As you know, Joe diGenova, who's been identified as a member of the Trump legal team, said on Monday that he thought you should be taken out and shot, and then later said he only made the comment in jest. You said yesterday morning on the NBC Today show that you were considering legal action after that comment. Tell us a little more about that. How can you protect yourself against threats like that, whether seemingly in jest or not? How do you go forward legally?
So, I think the first thing is that, in times like this, you really find out who your friends are and who's there behind you. And I've just got to thank everyone that's been so supportive, really just coming out of the woodwork. And it's been universal, both sides of the aisle. So and bigger than that, it's the tech community as whole has been just incredibly supportive. And I want to thank them directly. Now, as for my legal options, I'm not going to litigate this on TV and in a parking lot somewhere. My lawyers will do the talking. They'll do it in court. And I got a lot of confidence. They're an outstanding team that knows how to win. And like I said yesterday, they're going to be busy.
So Attorney General Barr said yesterday that, in his words, he has not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election. And a lot of us read that and wondered, okay, is that it? Is this over? Do we finally have enough of a consensus among senior administration officials, among Republicans, that we can say we're now heading toward a successful transition. What was your reaction to the Barr statement?
That's his job to talk about fraud and to give a kind of sense of what the temperature is out there. And so it was consistent with my understanding. It was consistent with my conversations with both the law enforcement community and the election officials across the country. And so to me, it was in some sense confirmation and affirmation of what we understood to be taken. But that's his job to talk about it. I also think that it's temporal. It's a sense, of today or leading up to when he made that statement. And if more evidence is out there, then folks will bring that forward and they'll investigate. But again, I think it's consistent with everything that we've thought about fraud for years and years. And so I think it's just it's a good, perhaps a coda of the controversies out there, and we just need to move forward.
Speaking of Barr, during the election campaign, he made himself repeated statements about the dangers of fraud because of mail-in voting. That can't have been helpful to your work of trying to control rumors and run an orderly election.
So again, I think it's important to distinguish between cybersecurity and security and supply chain issues related with the administration of an election, particularly the technology involved, and fraud issues. Fraud is something that for the law enforcement community. Now, there were some claims that we thought were a little, out beyond belief. Foreign adversaries printing out ballots and mailing them in from St. Petersburg or Tehran or wherever. Again, this goes to something that we've been trying to reinforce over and over is just the security controls in place at all points. In that technology, election administrators use technology to increase access to the ballot box and use technology to increase accuracy of the results. They also understand, though, that technology cannot be a single point of failure. And so there are controls at all times, before, during, and after. And again, what we saw down in Georgia with paper, where there was a hand recount, where the outcome was consistent to the machine count, it's just evidence that the controls in place work.
You were clear this morning in your article in the Washington Post about how important paper ballots and the redundancy of systems has been in providing us a reliable outcome. What if we hadn't had that redundancy and we'd had these kinds of charges? Would we be in a much more precarious situation, do you think, without the additional systems?
David, don't put that evil on me. I don't want to even think about that. I think what we need to be doing now is thinking about the future and how we continue to invest in democracy. The key distinction here is that in 2016, the numbers I've thrown around, and they're based on both the Brennan Center as well as the Center for Election Innovation and Research, there was anywhere from 75% to 82%. I historically say 82%. It's hard to really get that ground truth on what the real number is. But anyway, anywhere between 75 to 82% of the vote was cast in the 2016 were cast with a paper auditable, voter verifiable paper audit trail. And we believe that number was on the order of about 95% for the 2020. To me, what we need to be focusing on is how do we close out that last 5%? The trends are already there. The vendors aren't selling those paperless systems really anymore. So the state of Louisiana, how do we help them get over the hump here? How do we help Texas and Indiana and Tennessee that still have those systems? How do we help New Jersey that had switched to mail-in but still has these systems? That's, to me, is the real question. I think Congress needs to prioritize from a risk management grant funding perspective, just complete eradication and elimination of those systems across the country.
Chris, let's talk about what we imagined a year ago would be the real threat to the integrity of our election, and that was foreign interference. There have been relatively few reports of interference in the 2020 election by Russia or Iran, but you're the person who has the most knowledge about this. Were there moments when an adversary appeared to be getting inside our election systems, where you had to scramble the troops, as it were, to make sure that the systems were protected.
So I wouldn't say that I'm the person that knows the most about this. I had a pretty good insight, and I'm not going to talk clearly about classified information here, but what we saw, what we planned for, was a range of actors from Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, and cyber criminals seeking to interfere with the election. And so we had a pretty comprehensive set of scenarios that we baseline against. And I'm the type that, you know, never gets comfortable, always is thinking forward. You could call it paranoid. But we had a range of scenarios. And so what we saw in the run up to the 2020 was actually a fairly quiet election foreign interference landscape. And that could be due to any number of reasons. I think part of it is that we had almost 4 years to prep. The last administration had about 4 months. And prep, you can't buy that time. You can't really find any other substitute. So we had more visibility. We were looking over there. We were hardening systems here. What we did see, though, was Iran try to make a play in mid to late October. You may recall those emails that were purportedly from the Proud Boys. They did some scanning and got some state election websites to spit out some voter data. And so we were really trying to get ahead of that, put information out there to the American people through rumor control, that if you see voter information out there, it's not always because a system was hacked. Now, the other aspect of this is we did see Russia over the course of the late fall they were undertaking a really broad scanning campaign, and that's what Russia does. So this wasn't just just elections. It was state, local, private sector, federal government agencies, and just out of an abundance of transparency and out of an abundance of caution, where we did see them land into two voter or election systems or election that had systems that had election information, not the voting systems themselves. We felt that it was important to disclose that and share that with the American people. But that was a much broader Russian cyber campaign and scanning campaign that's as far as I can tell still underway.
So, Chris, let's talk about how to build greater trust in this system going forward. You had a lot of success, and as you said, this was the most secure election in our history, in your words. But even so, polls show that as many as 80% of Republicans think that fraud was involved, and one poll said that only 29% of Republicans believe that Joe Biden was fairly elected. And so I want to ask you, you've described yourself as a lifelong Republican. How do we get those 80% of Republicans to have more confidence in the system?
So this is challenging, right? There are a couple different aspects of this, 3 at least. One is that we need both parties to just cut it out and come clean and acknowledge that this was a legitimate election and we need to move forward. The second thing I think we need to do is continue to invest in democracy. We need to have more grant funding going out there on a consistent basis to both retire those old systems as well as invest in more modern technology and upgrades. And then we also need to be able to incentivize innovation, and that includes more post-election audits. And it's those sorts of things, more paper, more post-election audits that give transparency and an evidence-based approach to elections. And then the third thing is that, it's unfortunate, but I don't feel as if, Americans really think much about elections and how they happen, other than every 4 years, maybe every 2 years. So civic education has to get back on the books. We've got to get more folks, and we got to make it easier to access how elections work. And again, we talked about it all throughout the election is Trusted Info 2020. That was the campaign that the secretaries of state and the secretaries or the state election directors had launched. If you want to know more about elections, reach out to your local election.
Chris, what would be your brief advice to the incoming administration of President-elect Biden and to the person that he has chosen as his head of Homeland Security, Ali Mayorkas, in terms of thinking about election security and then the broader mission of cybersecurity that your agency was charged with overseeing? What would you like to see them do?
Well, continue the vision. And first, the secretary nominee, Mayorkas, is fantastic, a great pick. We have to continue investing in public-private partnerships, and that's also kind of one of those DC bureaucratic terms. But I'm telling you, what we did for election security across the entire interagency with the intelligence community, the law enforcement community, Department of Defense, with the civilian agency, CISA, and our state and local partners, we cracked the code. We figured out how to truly work together from a cybersecurity perspective, and we found the holy grail in information sharing. That's another bureaucratic term in DC. But on election day, a state reported to us that they were seeing some scanning trying to exploit a vulnerable system. Now, the state was able to knock it down, but they reported that to us. We passed that over to one of our federal partners, and they did what they do. And that's never happened like that. Defense in near real time. We need to break that down, the successes, whatever we caught, lightning in a bottle, and then replicate it. We're doing it right now, or they're doing it right now for Operation Warp Speed and the vaccine development. This can work. Collective defense is a concept and in practice can work. We have to continue to invest in that. Balance defense and offense investment primarily.
Were you satisfied, Chris, with the performance of the social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook? And do you think they behaved in a responsible way that added to the security and safety of the election?
So in terms of what we saw, certainly from a foreign interference perspective, I think the social media platforms deserve a lot of credit. And the proof is not just in the things I say, but you look in the behavior of the adversary. The behavior of the adversary changed, it evolved. They had to ditch their old techniques and tools and send things offshore because the friction, because of the deplatforming activities that the socials did. And so I think they deserve a lot of credit for upping their game. And then our intelligence community partners and law enforcement also, when you make the adversary change their behavior and change your tactics, that tells you that something's working. Now, did we completely cut it out? No, but they were not as successful as they had been previously. So yes, they deserve. I believe they deserve credit.
So we've talked, Chris, throughout this half hour about the importance of putting country ahead of party and the way that you and CISA were able to form a task force that spread across all the different states and all the different party officials involved. So an obvious question for me is, if you were asked by the next administration, headed by a Democratic president, to return to DHS or to serve in some other capacity, would you consider doing that?
Well, anytime you get asked by the leader of the free world to come in and take on an important role, you have to give it all due consideration. There are a series of other responsibilities I have to balance out, including a family. So there'll be a series of considerations and conversations that would have to happen around that. But I'm just so proud of the CISA team. I'm proud of the fact that we're maybe a household name right now, and for a good reason, for the right reasons. Usually, when you hear about CISA, it's because something bad happened. I couldn't be prouder of that team, and they've done such a great job over the last several years, and there's a really bright future ahead for them.
And do you think that Congress needs to consider new legislation that gives additional powers to oversee cybersecurity, infrastructure security? You'll remember, as I do, the Cybersecurity Solarium Commission that issued a report back in March calling for significantly greater powers for CISA. Is that a good idea? Should Congress take that up?
Absolutely. And they already have. If you look at the National Defense Authorization Act, there are several provisions in there that would give CISA additional authorities for the right reasons, and including additional partnership authorities and coordination authorities across the federal government. The NDAA, this year's National Defense Authorization Act, is a must pass. for not just for CISA, but for the entire national security community, it must pass.
So I have a final question for you. I'm sure it's one that's shared by many of our viewers. I think a lot of us feel we've lived through this period of high anxiety surrounding our elections, almost constant challenges. I'm wondering, as we think back on this, whether one of our protections was that our system is decentralized, that there is no ability for the White House or the executive branch to completely dominate the process by which elections are administered. You did your part in coordinating a task force, but are we lucky that we have a federal system that we sometimes complain about?
I'm not sure I'd chalk it up to luck. I'd chalk it up to the founders and federalism, and that we are built on there are the states out there that do administer most of what happens in this country. And I think it's a good reminder right now of why it was designed that way, or perhaps less about why it was designed that way, but we should be thankful that it's designed that way. It should not be that an incumbent could put their thumb on the scale from an administration perspective. So I couldn't be more honored to have worked with all the secretaries of state and the election officials out there. They're the heroes right now. They're the heroes of democracy, and I look forward to working with them again in the future.
So, Chris Krebs, thank you for talking with us. Thank you for what you've been doing to help keep our elections safe and secure. That's all the time we have for our conversation today. Join us tomorrow at 9 a.m. for First Look. My colleague Jonathan Capehart will talk with Post columnists Dana Milbank and Kathleen Parker about the latest political headlines. Again, thanks to Chris Krebs. I'm David Ignatius, and thanks for watching Washington Post Live.